Hello, FROMville. We're back with a new episode of Crappy Reviews, but today we're not reviewing. We're dropping our big CR from speculations for your consideration. There are a ton of pieces of theories that touch on different questions surrounding FROMville and now wherever Tabitha may be, but we have the workings of some overarching answers that we may have.
As always, going forward, it's time to recognize our crappy comment of the episode. And today, that comment comes from Woodrow Nichols 348, who posted this comment in the comment section of the All Victor's Drawings video. This comment is particularly interesting because it calls out a discrepancy between the screenshot in the All Victor's Drawings video and the actual scene that you see when you watch it on the streaming service. If you're curious to look for yourself, you can check out the All Victor's Drawings video, timestamp 3 minutes and 59 seconds, and then refer back to your streaming service, Season 1, Episode 9, about 18 minutes in, and judge for yourself. It's a long comment, so I'm just going to read the beginning, but this is what the comment says. The pic of Ethan at 3 minutes and 59 seconds depicts Ethan and his mom looking at a drawing. We only see it from the back, but we can make out a giant spider in the opening of a spider hole, and it almost looks like the symbol, which is why I believe it was deleted from the version of the show shown on the network. End comment. Whether this was an intentional cut because of too much information, or it was just a general cut made in post, it was a great catch and a great comment, and we really appreciate it. So without further ado, let's get into the theories. We're going to handle these by addressing some of the biggest pending questions left after the end of Season 2 in the show.
First and foremost, let's start with where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? Where or when is FROMville? I think for starters, I would say I think we both agree it's not where we are, right? It's not our Earth. It's not our normal, what we think of
What
as
we would
a
consider
normal place,
reality.
right?
Yeah.
Reality. Yeah, that's probably a good way to put it. It's not, whether that's a different location. I think a lot of how we wanted to look at this episode was kind of the 5 W's, right? Your who, what, when, where, why. So in this case, I think we're both kind of on the same page that it could be a where, it could be a when. Locationally, I think that there are some possible answers there, but it could also potentially be a when.
Yeah, I think I've brought it up a few times. It could be a from where or a from when, or a little bit of both. I do think that, I'll say this, and I know I'm stuttering a little bit here. I used to think that they were not in the same reality at all. And then after listening to last episode and hearing Dead Tom talking about how things are natural but unfamiliar, I started to question whether or not they are in our reality and it's just a separate bubble that we can't see, or a natural phenomenon that happens from time to time, or every cycle this might happen. And I'm leaning to the fact that it's not in our, what we would consider normal reality.
So then let me ask you a follow-up to that. Do you think Tabitha is back in the normal reality? Because I personally am kind of on the team or the side of she's not there anymore, but she's not in the normal reality either.
It depends on that other scenario I brought up. Do we think that in the middle of this forest, every now and then for a cycle, this other pocket universe or dome or other version pops up, and they're still technically in reality, it's just another layer of our reality? Or do we think that this is an entirely separate dimension or realm?
Separate.
So I don't know if I think they're on a separate dimension or realm. I think Dead Tom kind of threw me for a loop a little bit. I was totally into the separate dimension or realm, but I feel like what I'm thinking now is that it's another layer of our own reality, and the boy in white pushed her through into what we can see. I think that would be a good way to put it.
Okay, so you do think she is back in the, I like using the term reality for this discussion. You think she's back in the same, our reality?
Yes.
Normal reality, right? Obviously it's the TV show, but like the TV show's reality, where the Matthews were driving before they were sucked in.
Yes, I think that there's a good chance she is. I'm not going to stake my life on it, but I think there's a good chance that she is. And some of the things that we see that are similar might just carry over. The only things that I would think are odd are the 42 on the door or the 11, whatever, however you want to add her door room number up, and the level 2 outside the room. There's a few other things outside the window that are creepy and are a little suspect, but for the most part, there's nothing that really screams she's not in our reality. So I'm going to lean maybe like 70-30 yes, that she's in what we would consider the reality prior to them arriving in FROMville.
So let me ask you one other quick question, because this is something we've talked about a lot offline. I think we've mentioned it on the show before, but the drawing of the town, a town, however you want to interpret it, where it looks like it's kind of in a snow globe.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of excuse me, is that where you're kind of thinking, if it is kind of I'll call it a pop-up, right? Where you're saying it's still natural, we're just not used to it, like Tom said, but it's popping up that it's kind of in that bubble. Is that kind of what that's signifying? Is that what you're
Yeah, I
thinking?
think that's kind of where I got the idea from. There's a couple different ones. You've seen them. I've
From
sent them to you before, but there's a few where these homes are in essentially bubbles or little domes. There's one that's on the Victor video that you can see, and anyone could pull it up. That's a deliberate snow globe. And there even looks like there might be something at the top. It's weird. The sky gets to the very, very top, like a snow globe, and then it has like an air bubble at the top where the water didn't fill the whole snow globe in a sense. And it looks like there's like a little bump, which could be like a spider, because within that scene there's like a spider that hangs down and some other stuff. So I feel like, yes, they are in some sort of a bubble. And I want to clarify, I think when I say not in the reality, a lot of sci-fi movies play it up where they're almost on like a different frequency, where if you were to tune the frequency a little bit different, we would see these other things that are around us, right? But because they're on a different frequency, they're like living among us, but we don't interact with them, kind of deal, is almost how I feel like it is. Like almost like other people are essentially driving through the town, but you just wouldn't know because they're on frequency 98 and we're on frequency 102, and they're just not in our reality. But if we ever join frequencies, then yes, they would mix, but that's just not how it works. And the boy in white or whatever entities kind of run the show are able to maybe, break that fourth wall,
kind of
but travel between them. But I feel like it's almost like not that we're on a whole new realm or plane, but we're on the same plane. We're just on different radio frequencies, which I didn't think about it when I said it, but they play with the radio and the frequencies a lot throughout the show. It pops up how they can hear things. So I feel like they're there, but not where we can see them. I know I threw you for a loop because we didn't discuss that at all prior to the show.
Yeah, well, because then you
it just
'cause
kind of
then you
hit
said
me
the
as I'm
radio
saying it.
frequencies, and then you said the radio frequencies, and we've got like 47 on the one radio. We've got 16 that plays
yeah.
up, shows up on the radio earlier.
Plus
So
Jim's
that is a very
radio.
that's
so
pretty interesting concept.
it happened in a few
I like
episodes
the
of different
sound of it.
shows. Yeah, there's an episode of a few different episodes of like sci-fi shows like Stargate SG-1 where like the radio frequencies got a little closer and you could start to see things. And there's also some like alien documentaries that have this theory as well. I'm not saying it's all true in that respect. I'm just saying it's an interesting theory for a TV show.
Speaking of the people, right, kind of being on, okay, these people are driving through, and it kind of made me think of it when you were saying, oh, maybe people are driving through and we just can't see them. If they are in a different pocket reality dimension, I refer to it as a realm, which I'll touch on more later. Why are these the people that we're seeing here? I know, again, I'll kind of speak for both of us that I know we agree with, I think, most of the Fromily, that they're being kind of selected for a role almost. Like
100%.
they're playing some type of part. There's a
Yeah.
role they're filling. And I know that that's kind of like the biggest answer, right? That's kind of the overarching why these people. But what are your thoughts on, the Matthews and Boyd?
Well, so there's been a few different camps of putting people in, like the trauma camp and the depression camp and any kind of, I don't want to say negative, but just some sort of distress that they might be in for whatever reason.
It is some kind of trauma that they've experienced.
Yeah, they've all experienced something one way or the other. And they didn't show everyone's background, but everyone that we have seen, there is some sort of trauma along the way, except for maybe Boyd. Boyd doesn't really have
Well,
trauma. It could be a
well,
PTSD
Boyd
thing.
and his wife, yeah, were both in the military,
And
and I
it
feel
could
like
also be that he felt
that could
like
be a
he
big
didn't,
assumption, but
like he was lost or didn't have like a purpose, like he was like kind of the get it done guy and he was kind of just like floating. But I don't remember there wasn't
Mr.
like,
Fish and Loaves.
yeah, there wasn't like a real trauma until after he got into the town. But it could be that they have trauma and they need to work through that. And this is a way to do that. But that puts us into like a different realm of why they're there, more of like a
Well,
purgatory kind of thing. And I don't subscribe to that. So I think that they are there on purpose and chosen. And the reason I think that mainly is because the president and the showrunner for MGM Plus said at the end of the series, we will know why these people are there. So clearly there's a reason and they are selected. But I think it probably has to do with their traumas or fears or insecurities.
well, and I like doing this kind of live because kind of to your point with the radio frequency, something just kind of popped in my head too, right? If people are being brought in kind of as a group, if you will, right? Maybe there are people sucked in, if you will, brought into the town because they're with the person, right? Like
Yeah.
Ethan is there. I don't want to minimize anything, but like obviously we know that Jim and Tabitha lost a child.
Mhm.
And I would say from just I won't say personal experience, but that would probably hit them on a trauma level much harder than a young Ethan. So he could have been just brought in with them, right? Maybe Ellis was brought in with his parents because who knows if maybe Abby had experienced some kind of trauma or PTSD while she was in the military, and Boyd and Ellis just happened to be in the car, right? Toby got sucked in with Jade. Jade had just gone through this whole thing where he sold his company, which he plays off as this big win, but I've always kind of thought maybe there's a piece with the trauma thing that he wasn't happy about it. Maybe he was forced out. He seemed like he might have had a problem with drugs. Just like
He
that
has this
trauma could
whole
have been there.
he had
And
that whole
Toby,
conversation about his grandmother too and some loss and some
yeah.
things
So
like
maybe
that.
Toby,
So
you kind of have that innocent bystander kind of piece where they just happen to be in the car
poor Toby.
or
R.I.P.
the building.
Toby getting his tongue cut
R.I.P.
out
Toby.
and
That's that's an unfortunate. If he really was an innocent bystander, that is
man,
literally the
that
worst turn of
is
you
just
could have hoped for.
an unlucky
Um,
day.
that oh, yeah, rough for Toby. So maybe I do think that going back to there was some kind of trauma that singled them out, if you will, made them a candidate. Maybe is a way to put it. Right? They had to gone through that, but and maybe not everybody did, but they just were with someone who did. Um,
Yeah,
that was something kind of.
I think they're all there for a reason. I think they're specifically there. I don't think you're an innocent bystander. And if you are, if that is the case, then some of the people that came on the bus that like immediately died off, maybe they were the innocent bystanders. But it'd be very difficult to predict like who would be dumb and like go to shake the hand of a monster and who wouldn't. What if the people you need did it and didn't hide like they're supposed to? With that said though, the monsters or I'll take it back, I'm sorry, the voices that Sarah heard predicted or at least saw the two cars coming and other cars had come before that did it. So there seems to be some sort of a vision that they can see. And again, this goes into where it could be that multiple reality or the multiple Earths theory where they can see like Doctor Strange with the time stone, like multiple different versions of what could happen. And they're just kind of like, as it gets closer, it kind of singles down. It could be something like that. I don't know if I subscribe to it either, but I'm trying to think outside the box and say, how could these entities know that things were going to happen? With that said, they could have just seen two cars on the road from their really high view and just surmise that they eventually would crash. I mean, that could be it too. But it seems to be, to your point, a cycle. And when two cars come, things happen and such takes place. So to answer your question, I think, yes, they're chosen. I think all the people that are there were there for whatever reason they're supposed to be there. The way that they get in, as we discussed off camera, is so the tower has the light at the top, like any lighthouse. And apparently we're under the assumption now that you leave the frequency or the realm or wherever you are in FROMland to go back to what we would consider regular reality through the tower. In the same note, the light as it goes around the top, since it covers a 360 view, and we have, to Jade's point, an impossible anomaly that everyone from different parts of the country shows up here. It could be as the light hits you, you go into the town, and as the light kept going, the car behind you just kept on driving. Where that's kind of like the frequency opener. That's what's moving things around. But then you would think that more people would be in there. So I don't know.
But to your point, if they're chosen specifically, the light could be targeting them, right? Like it's pointing at them. We know they're going to be chosen. We, I'm using air quotes on we. The thing knows they're going to be chosen, so the light hits it, sucks it up like a tractor beam, right? Just
right.
They're coming. Which again, I think is a good point to make, because we've obviously noticed that fire, there has to do something with fire, with how we travel, because of Boyd's use with the torch to get to see Martin, well, where Martin was. And then with Tabitha being in the lighthouse, I think you specifically made a really good call out that it's fire and not a floodlight inside the top of the lighthouse. So there's something there for sure. On top of the people being in the town, we have one other big group of, I don't even want to call them people in the town, and that's the monsters, right? We had all first season monsters, biggest issue, right? We have a lot more information about them, but what do we think they are? Because I think we still don't have an answer of what they are. So, Chris, what's your opinion on that?
I do not think that they are prior residents. I don't think they're zombies or vampires or anything like that. I think they're just manifestations. Manifestations.
No, yeah, you got it. You're good. Keep going.
You're
good. Keep going.
I think they're manifested by the evil
Drink
entity.
more of that Celsius, not a
there you go. I think that they're created by the entity for whatever reason. And I'll tell you what, not for whatever reason. They're created by the entity, in my opinion, to help. You had a really good metaphor for it, to be like an IV for fear for the entity. So I think the entity feeds off fear and pain and suffering, and I think it's pretty obvious because Abby pretty much told us that at the end of the season, that it doesn't want hope, it wants fear, and we all kind of knew that. And we also learned a pretty important factor, that it was trapped there, and an only way it could get back to town was to kind of be carried into town, which we learned Boyd did that. And then it just brought the rain, brought the cicadas. It was just wrecking people. Until then, it needed like an avatar or a surrogate to get its fear, which makes me think the monsters are out there just to, scare them, stir it up and help sustain the entity through fear. I do have some thoughts on that, but I'm going to let you give your answer first. I'll circle back to what I think.
So I will say, I do think they are former residents, and there's a more specific name for what I'm thinking they are, for kind of a larger theory piece that I'll touch on later. But I am starting to believe that they are kind of in the same position as the residents of the From folk, that they're kind of like pawns in a game, if you will. Okay. They're not necessarily working for somebody. They're not a manifestation, as you're kind of saying. Like, I get where you're coming from on that they're not necessarily to your point, not the former residents. But I think I'll say opinion on that, right? My kind of plausible scenario is that they're the former residents, and they're just trapped there like the From folk are, but they're just now monsters, right? They're no longer normal. They want to attack and kill them. But
I'm going to ask you this though, because you have that thought process. You've had it for a while, and you're not the only one. I mean, I would
say you're in the minority.
I am for sure
to believe that they're not
on this.
The From folk.
Almost everyone thinks that. Iteration. So I'm going to ask you and anyone listening in the audience that is on Team Rob. Where do we think that? Like, at what point do we ever see any evidence other than it seems to make logical sense that that's what happens to them? But at no point do we see, I mean, I could see even if we found one of the residents that we just lost their stuff down there in like a pile of the organs and they grow them or something. But I have seen no evidence leaning me to believe that anything else happens. There's not even people from before the 50s. So you would think that after a while you'd have like some Vikings and some Native Americans and some Victorian age people, and then the milkman and the mechanic, and then people from Victor's era of like the 70s. But we only see a very specific time frame, no one before, no one after, and no other evidence that anybody that died in the latest in this current cycle is going to change into a monster.
So I can only answer that not necessarily with proof, but just kind of what I could speculate the answer would be. So it would just be that in my understanding of the show and what I've speculated to be what's happening, right? Again, I'm not saying it's for sure you're taking this with, you know, write it in ink because this is what's happening, but that they were the monsters that existed during Victor's iteration because the monsters previously that they had experienced, right? If they were the From folk from before Victor, the monsters they had experienced were wiped out during the reset, which, you know, we'll talk about that kind of reset piece. And then because of Victor, you know, sustaining and making it past his iteration to this new iteration, if you will, if this is not just potentially a continuation of his, the way it's kind of working out, that it wasn't reset. So you're still seeing the monsters from his timeline, if you will, that his iteration. So I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just, you know, that would be an answer in my mind for why. But I think you're entirely right and fair to ask, you know, where's the proof? Because we don't really have any other than like, because isn't, well, we don't know who the ventriloquist dummy belongs to.
Well, Victor
I
seems
think
to know. He seemed particularly bothered by
Yeah,
the
I
dummy.
know. I know that we've kind of talked about. I think it was offline about it possibly being Christopher's because he admit you. I think you said it specifically. Was it Christopher's? Victor mentioned that Christopher used to make everybody laugh. Could it have been
Right,
because he
right.
did a stand up bit with that slappy goosebumps looking ventriloquist dummy that makes me cringe? But so it's a really good point. You know, we don't actually have proof. It's more of just an assumption that we're all making.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that if and you'll talk more about we'll talk about the cycles and the resets and stuff soon, but in your kind of overarching current scenario
Mhm.
or theory that you think at the end definitely has a cycle and a reset involved. If that's the case, then yes, all the stuff from the older versions goes away and the caves are empty and then new stuff goes in there with it. That could be it. That's I think for me, I would just have expected to see, even if I don't see the monsters, you know, different artifacts from different time periods down there. But all we have that we can consider pretty old are the talismans, and that's not for the monsters. So I don't know. We'll see. Right now, I'm in the camp that they were somehow grown or created like for the sole purpose
Created
of
by the
being,
being.
yeah, of
Yeah.
being like lemmings to go out and do this. I'm also really interested on why they like surgically remove just the chest organs, and then when they opened one of them up, not one of them, when they opened up Smiley, R.I.P. Smiley, they saw that it was very dry and it was noticeably like you know, old and
Shriveled
dry
and
and shriveled
yeah.
up and stuff. And it's kind of odd that they take those inner organs and they have such dried out ones. And I don't know if maybe that's how they sustain themselves, because we never actually see them eating. We see them attacking and killing. Then
Mhm.
like, you know, the
We just
organs
see
are
the
gone
aftermath.
and they're like super cleanly taken out, and you know, like they like a lobster, and then they're gone again. So that must mean something, whether it's a sacrifice to this thing or they get to eat the meat to sustain themselves, but in turn the the being gets the fear or some kind of like partnership, you know, to that level. I don't know, but it's interesting enough to say.
So if they are working for it, what do you think it is? What do we think we definitely agree that there's a higher power. I don't think there is a single person that watches this show to this point, especially that's listening to us, that doesn't believe there's some higher power at play here, right? So let's start with that, right? Like what is the fear feeder it that Sarah's talking about when she's hearing in her head, right? What do you think that is? Or where, even maybe not specifically if you don't have a direct answer, what do we think?
Yeah, I don't have a direct answer. I know you'll kind of give a more directish kind of answer towards the end. And by the way, when he gives it, I'm gonna not say he's wrong or right because I don't know, and it could very well be that. But I don't really have a specific answer. What I do know is that it feeds off our pain and fear and insecurities and anything bad that comes with human nature. This entity kind of likes. What I find interesting about the entity is that one, it can be trapped, and
Hmm.
in town, what we found in the last episode, that it was happy to get out. It was happy to feel like Kenny. It was laughing at Boyd for bringing him in, and
Hmm.
then the
It
cicadas,
needed the
and
vessel.
yeah, it needed a way to get in, which kind of, I want to say, dumbs down its power, but it shows that it can be weakened and trapped, and it probably wasn't at full capacity. So I do think it's a real thing. I think there is an entity, and it's just, maybe it could be like a legion kind of thing, because Sarah and everyone hears multiple voices, so it could be like a legion sort of entity or just one, but it definitely feeds off fear, pain. If anything that's not good about the human condition, this thing likes, and it needs to be brought into town. Now, what's also interesting is that some of Victor's pictures early on show an obvious not monster attacking the town. It's like this misty monster, Grim Reaper looking
A
thing.
lost smoke monster. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, hold on a second now,
I know, I
because in
know,
the
I know.
very beginning of this episode of the show, when they get stopped at the tree and they look up and the crows go crazy, there's a definite dark mist that kind of goes over them. And then you get that same, like in the drawings, this like smoky
Kind of around
monster.
Colony House, right?
Well, around Colony House in one of the photos, it's just like
Right.
it's darkness. And then inside the bedroom, there's like this Grim Reaper
The
over a
one the
kid's
one that
bed.
kinda, it gives me, like, the Woman in Black kind of vibes looking,
Yep.
where it's, like, kinda crouched over and then
Right.
chasing it down the stairs.
And there's one
Yeah.
on Victor's door that, like, I don't want to say it looks like a tree, but like it's like tall and has like a wide jack-o'-lantern mouth. And that same one, which I showed you in the picture the other day, if you guys look real close and squint your eyes, in the opening scene when they show the girl's room who was initially killed in episode 1, the blood splatter, you can see that same face in there. I'll post a thing. It's obviously
Yeah.
there. It matches
Y
the one in Victor's room
yeah,
110%.
that one, I'm not even gonna lie, I couldn't believe when you sent that to me. I was like, "This dude's just making stuff up," and then I looked in at it and I was like, "Okay, that's pretty crazy." I'm
It's
not
like
gonna
you
lie.
can
That
kind of
that
tell it's
one's
there. It matches the one on Victor's door. I'm not saying it like leaves a trademark on there, but the show runners obviously kind of put something there for some foreshadowing. So it has been in town before, and it can run rampant and clearly get in, and something is stopping it from doing that. And we'll get into what I think about that a little bit later, and how it's not just running rampant and all, but I think it's a
well,
insecurity monster.
insecurity monster.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I
a
I
social
think
media monster, just feeds on insecurity.
yes, yes. That's why everybody wanted to talk about the sound quality last episode.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I don't want to talk about that. I'm very
no,
insecure
we
about
will
that.
talk about that actually, because if you guys couldn't tell, Chris has invested. We wanted to make sure that this didn't happen. We've got a nice fancy mic and uh a soundboard, so that it not a soundboard, but a blocker, that
Yeah,
we've
I
got
hope
some
it sounds
high
better.
quality velvety pipes from Chris on this one.
I hope it
So
sounds better. I was very upset. We had some unforeseen circumstances last week that threw off where we record and how we do it, and I was really not happy about it. But we didn't want to just not have a video go out at all, and we couldn't just wait another week. So hopefully this is a lot better, and it'll be like that going forward.
oh yeah, it's much better. But as far as it and what this evil entity is, I do think I agree that it is feeding off the fear. I do think it has a purpose or kind of a drive, which I know I keep kind of alluding to a larger topic later, but it'll all make sense when I'll say when I call my shot
Dun
uh,
dun dun.
towards towards the end of the episode. But yeah, it's kind of a larger evil overarching entity that wants to do something. But that means that there's also another higher power or powers that are also at play here, I believe. And I think that you kind of agree with me as well on this, even though it might not be the exact same, person, thing, entities. But if there is this evil, fear, feasting being, there's something against it that I think the boy in white is kind of a part of, or is potentially, if not, if he's not acting alone, he's a part of it, right?
Right.
And I don't know that I think going back to what we kind of said about the evil entity, I can't yet say exactly who the boy in white is, but I would say that he's definitely not evil, because we know we've established what the evil entity is, but he is, I wouldn't say good either, that he's more in it for himself and for stopping the evil in a way. But for the From folk, for Boyd, for Ethan and Victor who've seen him, like, for them to maybe think that he's good, I feel like would be incorrect also. Because I don't think he's necessarily looking out for the people. He's just looking out for himself slash stopping the evil entity.
So there's been a lot of people saying that the boy in white isn't good. He pushed her out the window, and how come he didn't save everybody? And he could just do all this stuff. And here's the deal. So Boyd's alluded to this. I think other people have alluded to this. There is rules that is obviously in place here. The reason we know that is because the big bad can't just roll in the town whenever it wants to. It's got energy levels, and it needs to feed, and it can be trapped, and all this kind of stuff. So there's rules to be followed. So my current thought process on this topic alone is that the boy in white is the force of good. And I agree with you that he doesn't necessarily care about Victor or Ethan or Tabitha personally, but he does take care of his part of the town. So whatever group of people are there, they're his responsibility, as if he's like babysitting them. Like the babysitter doesn't necessarily care about the kid as if it's their child, but it's their responsibility, and they're on the side of good, and they're going to do their best to keep them from harm. So I think the boy in white has a job to do, and his job is to keep the bad from getting too strong. And the reason that the boy in white can't just let everybody go is because he's got both hands and a foot on the door holding this bad boy back from getting in, and all he can do is use the one hand to push her out there and try to help move this process along. I think he did it with Eloise. I think he did it with Tabitha. I think that the majority of the boy in white's energy is spent assisting them and also making sure this thing doesn't get too powerful, and that's why he can't just open the floodgates. There's that, and also we'd only have one season of TV.
Yeah, I know we talk about it a lot too, where we
So
kind of mention. No, I do. We've mentioned it a lot offline, where sometimes we have to take a step back and think about it as a TV show too,
right.
right? Like there's a lot of stuff that we can put into world building, but you also have to remember it's a TV show.
Why would you walk
Um,
into that scary house? Because if not, the horror movie would be over. They would have drove past it.
Scooby Doo would be the worst
Leatherface,
show ever if they just
Leatherface
never
never had
walked in.
anyone there, so it wouldn't matter.
I do think I feel bad that I can't remember who the commenter was, because it was, I think, a couple weeks ago, but somebody did kind of refer to him as a shepherd almost.
That's
That
a
was kind of
very
a
good way of
conversation I
looking at it.
had,
Yes.
because, and I even made the call out, well, hey, he's got a German shepherd with him that's always kind of around at the same time, that's almost corralling, right? That, like the dog that Boyd sees is the
Right.
same one that Victor saw when everybody was massacred. So there is kind of a shepherd quality to him, where it's like, yeah, I'm responsible for him. It doesn't necessarily mean he cares about him. That all being said, like you said, he's keeping this thing back. He's fighting with it. I have a reason, I think, that it's trying to be stopped. Why is this happening? Why is it resetting? We've said, we think it is kind of resetting in a way. What's the whole point, right? Because like I kind of said earlier, we've got our 5 W's of who, what, when, where, why. What's the why?
I don't know if I have a why. I don't. So here's the thing. To answer the why would be to solve the mystery of the show. And I don't think anybody can answer that right now except for the showrunners. But I do think we can say that we're getting cycles, and whether or not the same people come from every cycle, whether they're locked in a Groundhog Day loop or not, is probably something we can discuss. And is the town changing along the way? there's evidence of change. The star magic sign is not there anymore. Even in one of Victor's drawings, the memory of the massacre he walked out on and saw a star city, a star magic sign. And then in one of his early drawings that is in the video and on the website and everything else, the star magic sign's not there. So he even drew it not being there. So the town is changing. And also there's an example that I have on there where the truck that they pull up on to save the Matthews on episode 1, the license plate in Victor's room and the license plate in the truck are almost identical, the same numbers, but in a different organization, but the same characters exist. So I don't know if we're getting this multiverse thing where like every time it's a little bit different than the last time, but the same players are involved, or if we're getting cycles. And to Kenny's point, every cycle builds on the last cycle. So they're going to do some stuff in this cycle, maybe build a radio tower and maybe find the talismans, whatever it might be. And then like the next team comes in off the bench and they're building off that cycle, and it kind of goes that way until the end of the whatever this thing is. So I don't know the why, but I think that they are rebooting, and I'm leaning more towards like a multiversal nonlinear timeline kind of thing than I am like a total reset. I think these people have been there before.
I think something you've called out offline a lot is it's something that like lends a lot of credence to what you're saying. It doesn't necessarily, I don't know if it necessarily leans into my full scenario that I think could happen, but we were talking about it offline a little bit, that it would explain some of the different imagery we're starting to see in the show. Like obviously it's been called out before how there's no Bibles, there wasn't a church. By the gun shack, whatever you want to call it, there were crosses hanging on the wall when Reggie went just full Rambo on that guy. So, different imagery we could see would be because of potentially these layers of getting to the top. As you said, like Kenny kind of mentioned, maybe we're all just working step by step to eventually one day somebody's going to get out of here. Maybe we're just the next piece.
Jade alluded to the same thing too. I mean, he says it feels like they're opening in the middle of a book, but we that's how in-depth we are to the show. You feel like you're there.
I know you said we a couple times and I wanted to say something, so I'm glad you caught it.
They are the middle of the book. They are the middle of the jigsaw puzzle, right? To them, they feel lost, but in the grand scheme of things, from a high level point of view, they could be exactly how they feel. They don't really know. They're not supposed to know. Their job is to do the best they can here and then move on for the next group to come in. Because you're right, there is a few different odd things that happen. So for example, to your point, we're specifically told there's no Bibles. There's no Abrahamic churches there. There's no churches at all, but specifically not one that Father Kadri would have a service at. And then we also see, as the show goes on, we see crosses in the gun shed. We see Tilly saying the Our Father in a prayer circle at the last episode.
Prayer circle, yeah.
Right. And then we also see Tabitha wake up in a hospital that's named after a patron saint. So there was definitely some, and there's crosses on people's necks and whatnot. So there's definitely some input that this exists in the From universe, but it just isn't part of it. It's very hard to believe. It exists
there, so it's being brought in.
I think that you're getting. That's why I feel like there might be some sort of this like times all happening or multiverses or something like that, because you get different time periods, different buildings. I still don't think that the reason we have the candy bar and the soda brand so obscure is because they couldn't afford to pay Twix to put one in. It seems like maybe those soda brands and those candy bars were totally normal in the universe that they came from, but to us they're not, and they weren't like a cheap prop. They were just
not unnatural, just unfamiliar.
Yeah, everybody in that version of it all has those candy bars. It just seems, again, very odd that that Father Kadri did not have a Bible with him when he was driving. That out of I think I did the math on this, worldwide there's like 435 million Bibles a year sold. So for not one of them to end up in this town that's based off Middle America is statistically impossible. And it seems odd that that Father Kadri would be having a drawer full of candy bars that look like they're from the 50s to hand out to present day children, opposed to like a Snickers or a candy like a Twizzlers or something else. It's they zoom in on the candy bar, they zoom in on the soda machines, and if you're trying to say that we just couldn't afford to pay Nestle, you would brush past those and not put so much focus on them. But to zoom in specifically on this candy bar logo, it wasn't because they didn't want to pay Snickers to put one in there.
You know that offline I don't I kind of make the argument of the TV show
I know.
and theory think that kind of side of it, but I will definitely not discount. I'm not going to say I'm definitely not going to sit here and say you're wrong. It's more just my my personal thoughts on it was that it was more of a hey, let's save the money. We're working on shoestring budget right now too, and we just built a whole town, so let's just get some off brand
If this was
stuff. But
if this was like Seinfeld or Ted Lasso or Friends, I'd say sure. No one cares about the fact that Cosmo cereal is on the back shelf because you're looking at something else. But to have her draw a picture and then him go to this barrier circle and pull it up and make it part of his storyline and zoom in on it and you go no, I mean we just didn't want to put a Snickers in there because it cost us more. When you have other car brands, you have a bubbly in the RV, there's an iPhone with iPods and other stuff that's in there. It seems to me like they're trying to show me something. So, and it also is weird too. And I'm rambling a little bit about this topic, and I'm give Rob a second. But the motel that there's no building, and I'll be totally honest with everyone listening. I didn't know there wasn't a building till maybe season 2. I just never noticed that there wasn't a building. They don't bring it up in the
just
show.
cool, man.
Yeah, they don't bring it up in the show ever. You see the sign, you see this, there's kind of like a house by it. And then one day you look and you're like, it's not even a building there. So it leans again to this idea that with the people getting pulled in, that we're looking at multiple different homes and buildings and structures being sucked in, whether it's being hand chosen or it's just by random chance.
Yeah, we started talking about it before we started recording tonight that maybe it's wherever the person is that's already been chosen when they get sucked in, whatever they were in, the whole thing was just taken, right? So like the RV that the Matthews were in,
Right.
Toby and Jade in his car, maybe it was just maybe somebody was swimming in the pool at the motel. Some some dude or they were swimming in a pool and some dude was fixing a motel sign and he was climbed up on it and the whole thing
Yeah,
just got sucked in. Like
it seems unlikely. There just has to be a reason for these different structures of different time periods and for the motel not to be there and all this other stuff. And we had set off the show. I feel like there's really only two options here. One, we're dealing with it where things get sucked in because of some time loop or multiversal thing or many worlds theory, or AI or aliens repop like kind of built a town like they think it would. But it seems so unlikely. Maybe the AI simulation scenario because AI gets a little iffy. But if they built such a matrix, like something so real, I feel like the idea that they don't know there's a motel next to the pool seems not really rational. And if you can travel and do alien like stuff like this, the idea of not knowing things either seems a little unlikely either. That if you can build a whole city but you didn't know what a high school looks like, that seems kind of dumb too. So I feel like it's only that these things were somewhere else, kind of got sucked in along with it. I guess my question would be, where's the rest of the building since 1506? And your theory will kind of answer some of that for me.
yeah, I think with the resets like we've talked about, I'm getting the impression it's a hard reset. Let's put it that way, right? It's
With
not
the
just the
exception of
people that are
Victor.
going, well, which would explain
Right.
why the monsters are still the same
I'll let you
monsters
keep
and
going.
could
Go
be
ahead.
the same buildings. But it could be a hard reset where even the buildings and everything that's sucked in with it are getting replaced too. Yeah, where it's a hard reset where all of the people and the buildings are getting reset as well. So I'm gonna keep this short because I know I want to kind of summarize everything a little bit and I don't want to give it away too much. But I will say I think that it is resetting and the whole point, which kind of leads into a little bit of the roles and a game, if you will, at certain points, is that the evil entity is trying to accomplish something repeatedly. And there's either two outcomes where it either succeeds and a reset happens. And this is the one where I'm still kind of going back and forth on. I'm still saying this is speculation. This isn't a, hey, I'm telling you this is what happens. I'm not a writer on the show, but it's either succeeding and a reset happens, or it's attempting something. It's unsuccessful. The boy in white, the good, I'm using air quotes on good entity, wins that round, if you will, and it resets. You get your gap in time for a little bit. New people are chosen. They get brought in. We try again. And that's where you're kind of getting your resetting. And that's the whole point. That's why this is happening. So, with all of that being said, I know we've kind of touched on a couple different answers and theories for these biggest 5 W's of From. But Chris, now that season 2 has ended, what do you think could be the most plausible scenario going forward for the show?
So before we do this, I want to be clear. I think that I've heard pretty much every theory under the sun. I listen to the other commentators as much as everyone listening to this show does. I read Reddit like everybody else does. What I've noticed a lot of the times is that, and I gave the example to Rob, if we took 100 files with all the evidence that we have, that we know, on one table, and then had a theory in the other table, when everyone's done with their theory, they have about 30 files over there, and there's 70 that are still sitting on the evidence table. Because every theory sounds really good when you do the top of the theory. The simulation theory sounds good. The theory Rob's going to give us sounds good. The asylum theory, the aliens, the Beatuk theory, they all sound good when you leave out a lot of stuff. So this isn't to knock anyone. I just don't think that any of us can really give this is the theory. I think the best we can do is speculate on the overarching idea. And I think that my overarching idea is one of two things. I think we are dealing with some sort of time loop or dimensional thing. And I think that because Jade has brought up, and Dead Tom has brought up, multiple different philosophical and
scientific
string theory, chaos theory, Schrodinger's cat, which is the many worlds theory, and multiple different things that the authors have dropped into the show. That's not to say that they're doing it to throw us off track or confirming it, but they're definitely letting us know that their brains exist in this area, that we are aware these things exist. We know you're thinking about them, and they could possibly be it. And it's not too highbrow for this particular show. So based on that information, I'm trying to figure out a few things. And those things are, how are we getting some sort of time travel-like situation? How does Tabitha's bracelet get made in 1985 or 90 and show up on Victor's mom? How does Julie seem to know the monster in season 1, episode 1, when she kind of stares at him and has this moment? There's a few situations where there's clearly stuff that is coming from these people from other timelines or lives. So I think that we do have some sort of, to Tom's point, natural but unfamiliar scenario when it comes to physics or philosophy. I also think that the writers could be leaning on something in the vein of the Cabin in the Woods, I think from 2013, where there are entities and monsters and ancient beings, and all over the world there's these facilities where they have to play out these rituals, and the rituals are the cabin in the wood like stories that you get in the classic horror movie sense, the jock, the bimbo, the nerdy guy, etc. And they play these roles, and they craft these people to play these roles in order to sacrifice them and keep all these old gods at bay, and the world continues on like that. It wouldn't be that out of the realm of possibility that this is what we're dealing with. These people do seem to play roles. They are being particularly chosen. Jade is kind of working into a different role. There is people filling shoes of different people. It would admit that they do have a higher power or some sort of godlike thing, and we are trying to keep them at bay. So I think it could be that. In that vein, also, for those of you who haven't seen the Old movie by M. Night Shyamalan, the idea that this natural but unfamiliar place exists, humans find out about it, we don't really know what it is, but we use it to our benefit or destruction is probably something else that I think could happen. I wouldn't be super shocked if on the other side Tabitha finds out people know about it and they're looking into it and they're just as confused as we are on why a post office in the middle of Missouri popped up one day and then didn't show up the next day. And there's just a hole there and they've been just covering it up, but that's where it went. So I think that's kind of where I'm at. I don't have an overarching theory, but those are the veins that my brain is going down when I think about the overall plot for the show.
Yeah, and I will say I've been hinting to a big overarching one that I'll go into, but I want to also just add to Chris's point before he gave his ideas there that this is also from people who made Lost, who, for those who have watched Lost, know there were clues leading up to things early in that show that, we were introduced to characters in the final season or two that completely changed the entire outcome of the show. Um,
For better or
to
for
not spoil
worse, like it or love it. Yeah.
right, like to not spoil anything, I can just say like we meet Jacob late, very late in Lost, and there's a lot that comes from that. So that could be something we end up running into later too. But I think for me, what I'm kind of doing here is I'm just saying I'm kind of calling my shot based on what I've seen, what I think makes sense, and to Chris's point, there's a good chance it's not right, but I think there's a lot of aspects that could be. So
I didn't say
to
that.
kind of you kind of said it.
Yeah, maybe
Chris
I
doesn't
did.
think I'm right. He doesn't think I'm right.
I don't
Don't
think
worry,
he's
guys.
hold on. I don't think he's totally wrong. I had the same mindset up until a little bit ago, and I think that I'm on board for probably about 50% of it. So I don't think this is totally out of loop. I just don't know if it, to the point I made earlier, fills in enough of my gaps. But I do buy into most of it, and I'll chime in when at the end of that.
Okay, so to kind of use the framework we did to talk about this episode, we have the five W's, right? So I think where they are, I think they are in one of the nine Norse realms, which is kind of where I said, it's not what we know as reality, which in Norse would be Midgard, um, but that they are in one of the other nine, which would lead us to Yggdrasil, which is the tree that connects the realms. So you've got a lot of tie-ins there in my mind with the faraway tree, is where you could travel between locations. You've got the tree when they first enter. That could be a root of Yggdrasil. Again, I'm using could here a lot. This is just all speculation, and it's just a plausible scenario here. So yeah, you've got the tree connections. You've got the lake, which I believe could be Erdebrunner, which is the well that's located under the tree. Um, I'll go to the who in this case. I think you've got the people in town who are playing the roles of the different deities and gods in Norse paganism and Norse mythology that they're filling those roles leading up to um, kind of that big goal that the evil entity was talking about. They have to play these roles. So um, the monsters, I believe, are what are referred to as the Draugr, which are basically zombies from Norse mythology, without, just to make it simplified as possible. But essentially, if you don't bury the dead correctly, they can come back as these zombies, which in my mind, I was linking to if it was the former from residents that had died, they come back as the zombies in this kind of iteration. Um, I would say the higher powers, this is where we get into the meat of it. So you have your gods. Your boy in white is one of those gods. I won't put a name to anyone directly, but you've got, Odin and Thor and Loki are the kind of those Norse gods. But the evil entity here would be Surtur, who in Norse mythology is a warrior of kind of from the underworld that wants to start Ragnarok, or the end of the world for this realm. So, long story short, Surtur wants to start Ragnarok. He needs, in my opinion, help and needs to get stronger from feeding off of the fear. And he's trying to bring about Ragnarok. The boy in white is an entity that's one of these higher powers trying to stop it, but they need the people, these residents of FROMville, to fill the roles of Odin and Thor and the other original members of the gods who fought during Ragnarok. So that's why you're getting that reset, is because Surtur and Loki, who also is part of bringing about Ragnarok, are attempting to, and it's either working and the world itself is destroyed and you get a reset because in Ragnarok the world is destroyed but a new one is born and it's repopulated by two people who find sanctuary in the tree, or it's resetting because they failed and they have to bring in new, I'll call it pawns to the game to try and go through the scenario. That's a very quick summary of what I think is happening, but just to kind of answer that, they're in a different space because they are in Norse realm. It's Surtur and Loki trying to bring on Ragnarok, so you've got these higher powers trying to stop it. They need the people as, I'll say, avatars to kind of go through the motions to play this game because they can't just decide yes or no. And then I would just add that the one other biggest thing is that in Norse mythology, you have the Rainbow Bridge and how they travel between the realms as well, not just the tree. The lighthouse would then be kind of the analog to that Rainbow Bridge. That is the Rainbow Bridge here, which is why Tabitha being pushed out, again, to me, doesn't necessarily mean she's back in our realm. She could potentially be in another realm as well. That is why Chris says I'm not right. Chris, no, I'm just. He thinks there are parts. I'll give him that. I know there are some things that could be true, but to his point, for me to sit here and say this is definitely what's happening, I'm not going to say that. I think this is a very plausible outcome that we could have. I would personally love it. I think it would be a great interpretation of the material and how they went through with it.
But you had also mentioned, being that there's 3 seasons left in the show and that Ragnarok starts with a long 3-year winter, that it could correlate that since winter starts to show up, that it could maybe tie into the remaining 3 seasons of the show. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of runway we have here because I don't know that it's necessarily 3 seasons, but I know I've heard 5 seasons kind of tossed around at one point.
Yeah,
They
I've
don't
heard
want
that
this to be a they don't want this to be a 2-3 season show. We've got a lot of space here that even if to me it sounds pretty kind of outlandish from where we are right now, but I think we have a lot of runway, and it's more with that being such a prominent piece of the lore of Ragnarok. That's something that kind of piqued my interest that I just want to keep an eye on. Because if we see it happening, we get a long winter. You know who to come back to. Because I'm saying right now, Ragnarok.
I mean, look, so I was on board with most of this, and I think, to be honest with you, I think I kind of convinced you on some of these Norse folklore kind of ideas. So to go over a few reasons on why we had thought this, and Rob does, and I'm kind of slightly co-signed on it, is there's a pretty good deal of pagan symbolism in the show. And more importantly, one of the production designers in the trailer, or I guess not, maybe more bonus content behind the scenes stuff on MGM and on YouTube, had mentions that there's 12 unique talismans. And to go with that, there's 12 unique deities in the pagan pantheon, both the Greek and the Roman. They're essentially the same thing, but there in this pagan mythology or folklore, there's 12 main deities and there's 12 unique talismans, which is already interesting enough. And then when you put into the fact that the runes on the talismans are for sure pagan, that it definitely lends even more credence to it. And there's a short that we have on the channel that points at a few more things, but you'll definitely see the wheel of the year on there. You'll see the sun in the middle. There's definitely some more pagan influences in there, and that was and they're pretty obvious. So that definitely lent us that sort of idea. And
That tie in with the Norse paganism. Yeah.
yeah,
And one other thing I really wanted to call out because it was kind of a plot point that I think would kind of lead into the possibility is that Tabitha releasing the children, I'm thinking, is getting the children out of the tower, I think, is a key to kind of opening Ragnarok, if you will. Like, it would be a big key, and they need someone to do that. And the boy in white trying to stop it is why he apologizes to her before he pushes her out. He knows that she can't do it, or else it's going to happen, and she can't go back and tell other people, I'm just going to get her out of here because I'm sorry, this is what I got to do. I just wanted to add that because I think that was a big kind of key swing point to kind of explaining why it could have happened in this scenario. So just wanted to get
Yeah.
that one kind of on the record as well. But
And if anyone's in, I mean, you've seen me post a few of these things before, and I say you as the audience, but there's definitely a few things that pop up, and I'm gonna obviously butcher some of these names, but just as far as the runes go, there's one called the Tiwaz, and it's basically a straight arrow up, and we see Boyd carve that into a tree when he's going out into the woods, into the forest, and it means God, justice, sacrifice, laws, principle, warrior, a lot of things that would represent what Boyd is. The talismans themselves have an ingus, which is seed, and they also have a few other items on there too. An algiz, which is protection, divinity, teaching. So there's and to be clear, there's two different rune alphabets, an old and a new, and they don't all correlate exactly the same, but you mix these runes up, so it's not as if you see one and that's just what it means. If you put, CAR together, it's car, and CAT is cat, and although the letters and symbols are the same, they don't mean the same thing. And the rune alphabet works the same way. So there's definitely anyone can look this up. You'll notice quite a few different runes on the talismans, and they lean pretty heavily into the pagan folklore and history. And lastly, I'm going to speculate big time here, but I will post something on this, and this leans a little bit more towards Rob's theory as well. There's another rune called the Othala. It means homeland. It looks kind of like the triangle in the middle of the talisman with the two lines in the bottom, but there's no two lines on top. And I'll post it. But if you were to look at the town and you overlay
the kind of
symbol
the
on
overhead shot,
it lands pretty well, and it means homeland or origin place or a few different things. They all have different verbiage, but it definitely would fit pretty well. So there is a good bit of pagan folklore and symbolism that's in the show.
and
Rob's theory,
paganism.
and Rob's kind of sub theory here definitely ties into a lot of that stuff. I would not challenge, but definitely encourage you guys to go just check it out, do a little bit of research, and see if you guys come to the same conclusion that at least we're dealing with pagan influences in the show.
Yeah, I would say the way I want to phrase this is a lot of the clues have led Chris first and myself also doing a lot of research now too to Norse paganism, and then I'll say I kind of filled in the reasoning, right? The Ragnarok piece of why it's repeating. So that's kind of how we got here, using some of the clues and then leading to a potential answer. But that's kind of why we're here. So
like we said, it's going to be pretty difficult for anyone to have a real theory that ties up all the pieces together. I don't think any of us will ever get there until pretty deep into the show. If it goes 5 seasons, we could be going pretty far, because if you laid out
it'll
10
be like
theories today,
season 5, episode 8 until someone gets it all right.
10 theories today, the first episode of season 3 could knock 5 or 6 of those theories right out of the park just with one clue and go, none of that's real anymore. So I'll never on the video say like we know the answer, because we don't, but based on the evidence that we found, this is kind of the speculation we have. I'm going to leave Rob with one last question, though, even though this is running a little longer than we normally have them. What is your quick predictions for the plot of season 3 and how it might tie into the end of season 2?
Oh, man.
I think we're pretty much on the same page here.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can really say that I would say I'm confident about is that Tabitha's going to find Eloise on the outside, wherever that outside is, and try to work with her to potentially get back, because she's going to want to get back to her family and either just get back to them or try and get them out. Something's going to happen with Fatima and Ellis's baby. I don't know if it's just going to come out like as a demon baby or if it's going to come super early. I don't know. Something's going to happen with the baby. I don't think she's going to be pregnant the whole season.
Fun fact on that: the jewelry that she has on at times, the like orb or incense like jewelry she wears from episode to episode, is almost identical to the one that is worn in Rosemary's Baby by Rosemary, who, spoiler alert for a 1968 movie, I think, she has a demon child. So it would be just interesting. And we've already kind of had the idea that people's nightmares and fears come true and manifest in this area.
And Ellis is worried about it. Yeah.
Yeah. He definitely made a point to say that. So It's just a little bit of, they've already pulled from some Nightmare on Elm Street. They've pulled from other horror movies. It wouldn't be all that out of the question to have a Rosemary's Baby like scenario happening here. So,
And I think the only thing I'll lastly add is I think they find a good way to kill the monsters besides the worms. I think it'll happen in season 3. I'm just gonna put that out there. Whether it's the bile, whether it's not, whatever. I think they find another way.
yeah, I think you're right. I think they probably. I wouldn't be super surprised if we had a little bit of a time jump in season 3 from season 2. That Tabitha might have been in this other area for a little bit longer than what we think. So yeah, I'm pretty much in the same vein for you for predictions for season 3. I think she's going to meet Eloise. I think that the totem that she got from Victor, the lunchbox, and the drawing of Julie that he used to wrap up one of these snacks from season 1, I think episode 1 or 2, is also in there. That it's going to either prove to Eloise that what she experienced was real, or it's going to jog her memory that she was there. So either she got there and because she was a kid, they just put her through therapy and she went back